Adam, are you okay to take over screen share and give your presentation? Um, Adam Craig is postdoc over at Hong Kong Baptist University. Adam has been one of our most active collaborators and has contributed importantly to the work that we do here at Brain Health Alliance over the past 10 years. He's been with us working on collaborative research since 2014. So thank you very much, Adam, for everything that you've done over the past decade. Please.
Thanks for the opportunity. So, can we see the slides okay? Ready to go?
Yes.
All right. So we're calling this presentation from to the best of our knowledge to the best available knowledge, because that's a phrase people often use when they say to the best of our knowledge, no research exists. So as Professor Phelps himself introduced, dismissive literature reviews are ones where people say, oh, there's no further research on this thing we're working on prior to our work, when there may actually be. But in his case, the way he defined it, it could be that they actually are ignorant of the pre-existing research, or they may be genuinely aware, they may be aware of it, but lying, to put it bluntly. Whereas we are coining the term here a ghosting literature review, so it's an intentional burying of the prior work. So in an earlier paper with Brain Health Alliance put together, we classified wrong information based on whether it's intentionally wrong or not, and not necessarily, and whether the authors, when called out on it, do or do not correct the wrong information. And so our drawing of a distinction here between dismissive literature reviews as misinformation and ghosting literature reviews as disinformation is built on that distinction, which has already also appeared elsewhere. Don't want to pretend that we're the first to draw that distinction, but we added a couple new layers: anti-information and caco information, for cases where people refuse to correct the scientific record or other record. And so we then have room for other corresponding phrases: anti-review and caco review. So the ghosting review imposes some additional costs on the scientific record. It causes additional problems. So as with the dismissive review, it erases the past history of research, because people who read this statement that there's no prior work often don't go looking for prior work. But then also, it can be an example of plagiarism, where the ghosting literature review authors grabbed ideas from the original work. And if they did it intentionally, they're likely to keep doing it instead of mending their ways, called out on it. And then also, even if the ghosting literature review authors did do some actual experimental work, that work is actually less valuable, because now we can't add it to this larger sum of scientific research that exists but is being memory holed as Professor Phelps is wont to say. And so what can we do about this? So one is make the original works easier to find. Two, create web infrastructure for managing metadata. Three, make it easier to identify works that address the same ideas. And four, create tools for identifying equal and equivalent entities. So this all plays to the strengths of our ongoing Portal Doors project, which started, well, work on it probably started around 2005, but first paper came out in 2006 and was about this web-enabled ontology for nuclear medicine. Then available online in 2007 was the vision for the paper for the Portal Doors project itself, this distributed server infrastructure. Over the years, this has evolved into a system, a distributed system for multi-level, multifaceted metadata and data management with 5 different server types, where we've recently sort of added and then changed the name of, generally tweaked, but have largely settled on the Atlas server as a sort of minimal server that just serves URI identifiers and some other very basic info that you can use to look up the records for the same resource in the other types of servers. The portal servers, which are focused on lexical metadata, the doors directories, which are for semantic descriptions and locations, the nexus directories, which we're calling, combine both the portal and the doors info. And then Scribe provides a read-write portal for curating web service for curating records, whereas the other 4 are just about retrieving them, and which is useful so that if you use the read-only ones, you're not at risk of accidentally corrupting records when you're testing out new apps. So speaking of apps, we've got live instances of these web services and the curation app developed at Brain Health Alliance at these 3 domains. The whole thing is open source and free to download at GitHub. But an important point here is that the defining feature, the system, is not just a specific piece of software, but the specifications, the messaging protocol and REST API, which you can look up here also on GitHub. So even if you want to build your own version on a completely different technological stack, and say you didn't like Windows and .NET and all that, said no thanks, you could use something else. Like we made one using MongoDB and Node.js a few years ago. Getting on with it then, we created over the years a few example ontologies, formal ontologies, to help people create semantic markup to be served via NPDS servers with some specific areas we're interested in, like nuclear medicine, clinical telegaming, progressive neurodegenerative diseases. But then more fundamentally, we've got this PDP dream ontology, which is a sort of foundational ontology that then incorporates in modules for the guiding dream design principles behind the Portal Doors project, as well as some about the structure, describing the structure of NPDS records, the one module for contributor roles, and also the FAIR index, attribution to index reports, FAIR metrics, which we're about to get into. These are also available on GitHub. So these metrics are, in a sense, metrics of citational justice. How honest are you about where you're getting your information, and or if it's new to this work, are you saying that in all honesty? So we've been iterating on these for a while now, but they mainly come in a couple of at present. So one is designed for primary research articles. So we take and the fundamental core of the FAIR metrics is that they're about the meaning of ideas, of statements and claims, not just the wording. So it's built on this idea of equal and equivalent entities, which we also have a paper on our website. So key points are, is it correctly attributed, misattributed, genuinely novel, or plagiarized? Any given claim, and then we count up the number of claims in each category, then make some ratios that are FAIR metrics. We then made a second family for reviews of peer reviews. So these are for evaluating peer reviews. So we don't expect sort of completely new ideas to be introduced. We then split up the attributed and misattributed to get some more fine-grained insights. Are the statements about the target work the review is reviewing? Are they about the venue of publication, the conference or journal? Are they about some wider knowledge relevant to the paper's field of problem domain? But beyond that, it's the same basic logic, equivalent or not equivalent, attributed or misattributed, count it up, make the ratios. So an important point here is that we then want to record these analyses, including which statements in one work are equivalent to which statements in another, in an RDF description of the FAIR metrics analysis using the module from our PDP Dream ontology. Then we can add that to the descriptions in the doors side of the doors record or nexus record, so that we have now a public record of how this work was evaluated. So this is part of a larger movement we want to start toward reproducible peer review, where you can see what facts a review is grounded in, and thus a person looking over it, an independent reviewer looking over it, could see those facts and see whether they arrive at the same conclusion. Right. And so that then in turn is a part of the larger question of what sorts of social influences and institutions lead to behavior. Sorry, I didn't have room for all the references on this slide. I'll go over, give you a chance to look at the references at the end here. But a few different well-known studies and recent works have shown the ability of social influence to both support positive changes, but can also discourage positive changes if you surround yourself with peers who are also kind of stuck in the same rut. And similarly, authority can sway people to act poorly but also or for the better. And now in the age of social media, where a lot of your interactions are online, this can sway, these sorts of campaigns can sway people in large numbers, but it's how they sway people isn't always obvious. For instance, a recent study on petitions found that appealing to moral outrage made petitions more viral, but didn't necessarily lead to more signatures, while appealing to other factors could boost signatures but not virality. And now there's also the risk of LLMs being able to argue people into different types of opinions than they held previously. So this in turn risks creating a system where LLMs are hyper optimizing online content to sway mass opinion one way or another for potentially not so society friendly ends. And so what we propose instead is building decentralized online communities where built on this idea of people talking to people, individuals and small organizations creating their own repositories of data and sharing and building collaborative networks with data that are both human readable and machine readable, but making that machine readable markup work for semantic reasoning engines that are explainable and to some extent provable. Then, as part of that, then you need sort of metatextual context. So the FAIR metrics so far have been all about the content of the work, the ideas presented in it, but to judge, say, TACO information versus disinformation or anti-information from just misinformation, you need to know whether the authors were willing to correct the wrong information when given the opportunity. So, and do you have evidence that they knew the information was false when they wrote it in the first place? So, and that also goes for dismissive versus ghosting literature reviews. So then what sort of context we need should be incorporated into the FAIR metrics also. So there are existing ontology projects like the Friend of a Friend ontology, a academic version of that, Academis ontology, and Dublin Core that do have some social relationship type info, some terms and classes and relationships for encoding those sorts of info. So then what we can do is we can, as an example of a social context aware FAIR metric, we could have a plagiarism of known colleagues FAIR metric count, where if via FOF or some other social network ontology, we mark out, did these people know each other before the plagiarism occurred? That means it's more likely to be actual, we could say maybe that's more likely to be actual intentional plagiarism than if the person could plausibly claim they'd never heard of this other person, this other research, the plagiarist had never heard of the other researcher and their work. So you then can have ratio built on that deducts even more percentage points if they're known colleagues than if they were strangers. And so to sum up, The rise of the World Wide Web has increased access to information, but also the need to find the source of information. The NPDES cyber infrastructure supports this kind of effort to build metadata and data repositories and track the sources of information, and can be a sort of antidote to the centralization of power and information control that's arisen with Web 2.0 and social media, and can also be an antidote to the untraceable nature of supposed facts spit out by large language models. The rapidly shifting landscape will require the Portal Doors project to adapt and develop better strategies for accounting for social context and the shifting realities of our online world and of real human connections. Some references and so on. And actually, there are some references you might want to look at in paper draft that got going. Just going to scroll through these because some of them are missing the citations in the slides.
Thank you, Adam. I think the point Adam's making now is that we do cite prior work, we do cite prior literature, we do give credit where credit is due. One of our longstanding credos has been that we will always do the right thing even when other people do the wrong thing. So thank you for that overview and a summary of where we're at. And let's try and keep moving along. I'll try to be quick. My tech talk is the last one, and for those who want to take some time for at least some Q&A, some discussion. Just a shout out to Josh for your closing session. We will. I do think it's important that we have at least a few minutes Q&A for all the tech talks. So, all right. Let me thank you again, Adam. Much appreciated. Much appreciated.
Glad to be here.